Hi, I'm Nancy Forrester, Executive Director and CEO of the National EFT Training Institute here in Toronto, Canada. And I had an opportunity this morning to listen to an interview with Jack Canfield as part of the 8th Annual World Tapping Summit. And I thought it might be helpful to you if I shared a couple of the snippets that I took out of that interview. Now, the World Tapping Summit is a 10-day series of audios with experts who have incorporated EFT, emotional freedom techniques, into their work as coaches or as therapists or educators, trainers, corporate human resources developers, parents, teachers, or individuals who have a passion for healing and personal growth. And Jack Canfield is probably well known to you, perhaps best as the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. He's a multi-billionaire who started his life as a high school teacher and then moved into coaching and impacts on thousands of people every year as an empowerment coach and a trainer. His mission is inspiring and empowering people to live their highest vision. And some of the quotes that I took out of his interview this morning are, "I use EFT because it works, and it works fast. It's so amazing. I taught my kids how to tap for their test anxiety, and my son just got word that he has the highest score in the history of the GMAT exam." The GMAT is a test that you must take in order to apply to graduate school in Canada and the States. Jack also says EFT is universally applicable to anyone and anywhere where you're not living a miraculously perfect life. And he was so vulnerable in this interview. And he said, EFT has shifted everything for me. My purpose hasn't changed, but who I am as I'm pursuing that purpose is entirely different due to EFT. What's different for him is that he's able to set boundaries, and he's actually experiencing much more joy pursuing that vision than he ever used to. One of the highlights for me as someone who's been training and practicing EFT for over 18 years now is that everybody who uses tapping has a story, and it's a story that's really meaningful to them, that really takes their breath away about how quickly and gently this technique can actually shift energy and shift things for a person. And Jack's no different. He told a couple of stories in this interview. The first one is he was teaching overseas somewhere, and he was in front of 150 people. There was a woman in the audience who was a real estate person who, in all her years of doing real estate, had never been to the second story of any home that she was selling because she had such a phobia about stairs. In fact, in the hotel where they were having this workshop, it was a grand hotel with a huge big circular staircase. The only reason the woman could get to the workshop room was that they had an elevator. So she had taken the elevator up to the workshop room. She went on stage with Jack, and Jack did some EFT tapping with her for somewhere around 5 minutes, directly on this phobia, this fear that she has about staircases. And within that 5 minutes, with some very simple, straightforward tapping, she was then able to go up and down that staircase free of fear in front of all 150 of those participants in the workshop. Another story that Jack told is about a woman who was experiencing for years severe arthritic pain in her hands. And with EFT, Jack was able to take her to a memory that she had when she was 5 years old. Her family had just come from Poland to Canada, and this little 5-year-old was out in the backyard playing, and she had an adverse experience with a neighbor child. And she went running into the house and told her mother what had happened. And her mother called her a liar and said that such a thing would never happen in Canada. She was never to speak of that again. and punished her for that, and punished her by hitting her on her behind. And what this young girl did to protect herself was she put her hands over her behind in order to shield herself from the blows. And Jack Canfield was able to help her resolve the trauma of that event. And right in that moment, moments later, the pain in her hands went away. And Jack said he's checked in with her often since then, and the pain has stayed away. And finally, he shares the story of his own wife. And his wife, as a small child, had an experience where her father committed suicide. And as a young girl, as children do, she took that personally and came up with a belief that said in some way she ought to have been able to prevent that. And so she took responsibility for not only her father's happiness, but for making sure that other people in her life were happy as well. And although she knew this from years and years of therapy on an intellectual basis, she'd never really had relief from that early decision. And Jack's story is that with about 2 weeks of tapping, specifically he and his wife, on that issue, she was able to really feel relief from that responsibility as a young child, and it made significant differences not only in her life, but also in their relationship. Jack in this interview also tackles two of the favorite questions that always come up when people begin to learn and practice EFT. And one is, why focus on the negative? And it's an interesting question. Now, Jack's answer is that up until now, we didn't really have a way to actually do anything with what some people call negative. Here at the National Training Institute, we call the current truth. There's not really anything negative about it. It's just the current truth that we're experiencing. And so Jack calls EFT a breakthrough technology, which actually allows us to eliminate fear and to clean up whatever resistance is in our way to experiencing the life that we truly would like to. He makes the metaphor about it's like putting a smiley face on an empty gas gauge in the car and expecting somehow that that's going to make the car go somewhere. And he says at some point, you do have to address the reality that there is no gas in the car, and that is going to need to be addressed in order for that car to be able to take you where you want it to go. The other interesting question that he addresses, again, it's a common experience that people have an expectation that they can tap on an issue for a few rounds, and yes, in most cases they will experience a relief from that. And oftentimes it's permanent relief. But sometimes that issue will come back in different forms and will require some more tapping. And Jack laughs as he says that he's amused by that kind of expectation. He says it's like people saying, oh my gosh, I have to eat again, or oh my gosh, I have to put gas in the car again, or oh my gosh, I've got to clean the toilet again. That it's part of the human experience that there are requirements, that certain things are required to be addressed over and over again, and that some of these deeply held beliefs and experiences of ours really fall into that area. He talks about what it's like when we're rinsing out a container with soap in the kitchen sink. And sometimes there's just a little bit of soap such that one rinsing is enough to clear all the residue and all the soap bubbles. But oftentimes there's enough soap in the container that it's going to take several rinsings to actually eliminate all the soap bubbles that are there. Jack's area of expertise is using EFT or tapping for helping people to address what we call peak performance issues. So most people come into EFT tapping with some level of pain and suffering, whether that's physical pain that's happening in the body, whether it's psychological or emotional pain that's showing up. Maybe as relationship issues or health issues or issues in their bank account. But there's a certain level of pain and suffering when they first come into EFT. But with persistent and consistent use, what happens is that the pain and suffering actually resolves. And it's at that point that many people will stop tapping. When, as Jack says, that's actually the time that tapping really, really takes on its beauty. Because when the suffering is low enough, then we can start looking at the issues about really creating the life that we want to experience. And that tapping is a really powerful way to address the fears of rejection that always come up when people start to step out of their out of their comfort zone. And he suggests that we really have to redevelop our relationship with rejection. That we have this expectation that if we believe there's a possibility that we're going to be rejected if we take a certain step out of our comfort zone, well, then we just won't take that step because the rejection is something to be feared. And Jack says, rather than that, we need to recognize that rejection is a sign of growth, that there is no significant growth unless rejection goes along with it. He talks about his first Chicken Soup for the Soul book, which was rejected by over 100 publishers. And someone said to him, well, why didn't you stop? You had 100 rejections. And he said, well, we didn't stop because we didn't have a yes yet. And we knew the yes was out there. We just had to have enough rejections to be able to get to that yes piece. Jack was interviewed by Jessica Ortner from the Tapping Solution, and Jessica shared her own story of rejection, which I really found enjoyable. She was talking about when Jessica and her brother Nick Ortner were making their first full-length DVD. At that time it was called Try It on Everything. It's now called The Tapping Solution. And they were a couple of nobodies. They didn't know anybody. Nobody knew them. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any skills in making a DVD. This was just something that they said they really wanted to do. And Jessica's job was to get the help, to find the experts who would be interviewed talking about EFT and tapping. And so Jack Canfield was one of the people. This would be many years ago, maybe 10 years ago. Jack Canfield was one of the people that she wanted to interview. Well, she talked to Jack's assistant and she got rejected 3 different times. They just weren't interested. It's not a fit for Jack. The assistant had lots of ways, but they were all about rejection. Well, Jessica said she got so frustrated and so scared that this was never going to happen that she just started tapping on her fear of rejection, started tapping on her frustration. And in the midst of that tapping came this idea, and this is what happens when we engage in EFT, is we get clarity. And so the clarity that Jessica got, she got a name that came into her head, and the name was Joe Vitale. Now, Joe Vitale is well known for being a person on The Secret. And Jessica had the idea that she would call Joe Vitale's assistant. And she called the assistant, and the assistant said, oh my gosh, what beautiful timing. Joe is a huge proponent of tapping, and he has a new project coming out, and this would be an excellent accompaniment to his project. So Jessica went, and they did the interview, and it went very well. And Jessica said to Joe Vitale, you know, I really would like to interview Jack Canfield, and I know you know Jack. Would you be willing to say a kind word for me? And Joe said, absolutely, and sent a direct email to Jack Canfield and said, you need to let this young woman interview you. She's really on a mission here. And on the basis of that email, Jack Canfield then contacted Jessica and said yes to doing the interview with her. And of course, Jessica then did the interview, and it was a big part of the whole DVD on the Tapping Solution. If this is of interest to you and you would like to tune into the 8th World Tapping Summit, the link is underneath this video. If you would like to talk to me about how EFT can empower you in your life and your work and in the world, I would be really happy to do that. The website is www.NeftTI.com. NeftTI is NeftTI.com. And you can contact me directly at support@neftTI.com. Take care now. Bye-bye.